Hello, and welcome to Hot Off the Presses, the weekly feature of Continual, the con that never ends. Today we'll be discussing a single book, Concrete Dreams, Witches, Warriors, and Wise Women, from Perspective Press, publishing June 16th. We've got a great panel with us today, Jody, Lynn, Michele Tracy Berger, Paige Christie, Gail Z. Martin, Rebecca Wynick, and the publisher of Witches, Warriors, and Wise Women, Jason Graves. We'll get to them in just a minute, and they'll introduce themselves and tell you all about their wonderful stories. My name is Jean Marie Ward. I write fiction, nonfiction, everything in between, and I'll be your moderator for this panel. But really, the show isn't me. The show is all the wonderful people here. So, without further ado, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Jody.
Hi there, I'm Jody Lynn. I write science fiction and fantasy, and mostly with a humorous bent. I've published over 50 books and 170 short stories in genres ranging from contemporary humorous fantasy, medical science fiction, epic fantasy, space opera, and on and on and on.
Cool. Yes, and they are very funny. Michele?
Hi, I write across the speculative fiction universe, so magical realism, fantasy, sci-fi, but everything I write definitely has a twinge of horror, so consider myself more horror-oriented.
Nice contrast there. Paige?
I tend to write fantasy with a feminist bent. Probably best known for the Legacies of Arnon series. I have delved recently into a little bit more contemporary / urban fantasy, but I'm mostly known for my epic fantasy, genre mashing, trope flipping kind of stuff.
Yeah, urban fantasy is going to become a subject a little bit later on. It's also a subject for your story, but you'll get to that later, won't you, Gail?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Gail Z. Martin. I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, steampunk, near future, post-apocalyptic fiction. And as Morgan Bryce, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. And my story in the anthology is indeed urban fantasy.
Cool. Rebecca?
Hi, I tend to like my reality with a dose of fantasy. So I tend to write historical fantasy with some sort of time travel or supernatural element.
Okay. Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself and Perspective Press.
Okay. Well, I also write, I haven't written much lately. The press keeps me busy. But when I do write, I also write, the horror bent on all of my works, or even if they're in another genre. So I'm like Michele. Everything that I write has a touch of horror to it. So I have 5 novels written. Only 2 are available at the moment because I'm reworking my first series. But I have a dark fae urban fantasy, Gretchen Third, and I also have a definitely a horror novel, The Alewife, Curse of Obsession, that I wrote as an homage to Stephen King and threw a little bit of H.P. Lovecraft in, because who doesn't need, coastal marine horror?
Tentacles! Who doesn't need tentacles?
Fish monsters. Everybody needs fish monsters in their stories. But I am mostly at these days the publisher and editor-in-chief of Perspective Press, which I started 5 years ago.
And so many titles it has, yes.
We're approaching 35 now, so it's not bad.
Yeah, not bad at all, not bad at all. So you say that you have a preference for horror in your own writing. But Concrete Dreams is largely a urban fantasy, almost noir type thing. Could you tell us the genesis of the series?
Sure. So We have a paranormal anthology series called Off the Beaten Path. And back in 2017, I knew I wanted to do some other types of anthologies. So we had, I had gotten this. Oh, it's not letting me do it.
Hold it still.
Okay. Anyway, that's
The title?
Tales from the Old Black Ambulance,
Okay.
which was a title that just popped into my head one day when I was driving. So I knew I wanted to do that. That was going to be a standalone. It's all horror stories about hearses, obviously, because that's the Old Black Ambulance. Cemeteries, graveyards, mortuaries, mausoleums, funerary rites, all kind of creepy things. And I also wanted to do an urban fantasy anthology. So Gail's been in on this from the beginning, because this is like 2017. We were having this conversation.
LibertyCon.
Yeah, LibertyCon, and then at the Bookmarks Festival in Winston-Salem, we were having barbecue. And I'm, throwing these ideas out. And Gail signed on, so she sent 2 stories, one for Tales from the Old Black Ambulance and another one for Witches, Warriors, and Wise Women, which was not the original title of the book, but I can touch on that in a second. And so, yeah, so she's been kind of long suffering in that respect, that she sent me these stories, and back in 2017, and the first anthology didn't come out until 2019, and the second one is now coming out in 2020. So I applaud her stick-to-itiveness with this, because but
Until we got the galleys to proof, I had actually forgotten what I sent you.
Oh dear, oh dear. What?
Go ahead.
Oh, what prompt? We're still working out the bugs here. What prompted you to make women the focus of the first anthology in the Concrete Dreams series?
Right. So that was actually what I was going to talk about. So Perspective Press has always been a very pro-feminist, underrepresented voices. We have an autistic author who's written an autistic novel, or a novel with an autistic hero. Obviously, I've got lots of women authors, women writers have written stories for us. So that's always been in the background. That's always been something that the press is founded on. So when we're doing the urban fantasy anthology, it was just open up. Just send me urban fantasy stories or modern fantasy. They don't have to necessarily be set in an urban setting. And I think that you want to talk about that at some point.
Yeah.
Some of the stories aren't set in cities, they're set in communities. And so I think that's an important point, that sometimes urban fantasy isn't part of a city, but I'll leave you to talk about that a little bit more. So people kept asking when they were making submissions or wanting to make submissions, what's a theme? And I'm like, I don't know, urban fantasy. And I did some hand waving and said, make it kind of like post-steampunk or something, magic and gears. But the funny thing is, nobody sent me anything that was post-steampunk. I just kept getting these stories about women doing these great things. And so it occurred to me at some point that was the theme of the anthology. The writers actually generated, without realizing it, all of the authors generated the theme of the anthology, because all the stories that turned out were either about witches, warriors, or wise women. And so it almost made itself in that respect.
So essentially the authors determined the theme. Was it invitation or was it open submission?
It was both, but a lot of the authors, actually everybody here on the screen was an invited author. Including yourself, because I asked you if you'd write the foreword, and I was thrilled when you said yes.
Well, I was thrilled to do it because urban fantasy and women-centric urban fantasy are my jam, so it was great. Thank you for the opportunity. So I'm going to now switch back to the writers and ask them to tell us a bit about their story. And again, I'm going to start with Jody for this one.
Mhm.
You know, I was reading the story, Seeing the Pattern,
Mhm.
and I love how you tied in sand and concrete by using the Sandman's Guild, which was part of one of your older series relating to the Fairy Godmothers Union. Do I have
That's
that
right.
right?
Yes, you do.
Okay. What prompted you to go back to that world for this particular story?
I'm
And could
very
you,
fond. I'm very fond of this world. It started out with a book called The Magic Touch, which was about my two main characters were an elderly Jewish lady and a teenage African American boy who was just getting out of high school, and his grandmother wanted to keep him away from the unions. From the gangs.
thanks?
So she sent him to join the Fairy Godmothers Union, and he is totally not on board with this until he sees magic done. And then he starts to become good at it. He discovers there are other service unions in the city of Chicago, and in fact, in most major urban centers, such as the House Brownies, the Tooth Fairies, and the Sandmen.
Mhm.
So in the second outing, it was called Best Wishes. We're introduced to not only a female genie, but a female Sandman. And she, Ayosha Gilbert, is a medical student. Actually, she's a psychiatry student at Northwestern University, where my character Ray has begun his studies.
Mhm.
So she was such an interesting character that I wanted to explore her life a little bit more.
And that was the what we see in your story, Seeing the Pattern. So
That's right.
cool.
She's actually 2 years younger than she was in the first story about her. This is before she ever met Ray or any of the others. She's trying to find her feet. She's she's adopted. She comes from South Georgia, and she's very smart and has a huge heart. So
Yeah.
her talents, well, the Sandmen give people dreams. That's their talent, the kind of dreams that they deserve. Most people, she takes their mind off their troubles. People who really deserve to have a nightmare, she will eventually learn to do that too. But her job mostly is to give people dreams that comfort them, dreams that help straighten out what they went through during the day. And she's been volunteering at a battered women's shelter. So she discovers a woman who has been horribly abused, and it is in fact a pattern. She's seeing sort of the same face pop up in other people's minds, in other people's dreams, and trying to steer it to a place where they feel strong, where they can handle what they have during the day because they're in control, much more in control of their dreams at night, thanks to her. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed giving power to the powerless.
Yes. And getting justice for the powerless.
Yes, very much so.
Cool. Gail, you're also working in a continuing series, your Deadly Curiosities urban fantasy series set in Charleston, South Carolina. Could you give our viewers a little insight into how your story, Heap of Trouble, relates to the Deadly Curiosities series?
Sure. Deadly Curiosities, as you said, is set in Charleston, South Carolina. Beautiful, historic, very, very haunted city. And my main character, Cassidy Kincaid, is a psychometric. So she can read the history and magic of objects by touching them. And she's the proprietor of Trifles and Folly, which is an antique and curio shop that has been around and in her family for 350 years. And while it's an exceptional antique shop, it is really a cover for a coalition of mortals and immortals who get dangerous supernatural objects off the market and out of the wrong hands and save the world. Mm-hmm. So her family's been doing this since Charleston's founding. Her business partner is a nearly 600-year-old vampire, and her best friend and assistant manager is a guy who is a witch and can weave magic into cloth and is also a hell of a hacker. So in Heap of Trouble, the story fits in like an extra episode. If you think of the books, and there are 5 now in the series, plus 2 collections of short stories that appeared in other anthologies, the short stories and novellas are kind of like extra episodes that fit in around and between the books. You don't have to read the short stories to enjoy the books, but if you have read the books, you'll see more of continuing characters. You might see a little more of their backstory or their origin story. And so the world kind of fleshes out from there. Mm-hmm. And in Heap of Trouble, Cassidy runs into something that she's never run into before, which is that a total stranger bequeaths her house to Trifles and Folly. Cassidy's never heard of this woman. They have no idea why, but they figure whatever the reason is, it can't be anything good. And so they need to first figure out why the person thought it was important to bequeath the house to Trifles and Folly, and then what the secret is that's hidden in the house that's going to take all of Cassidy's mojo and a number of her friends and allies to keep the world from ending again.
It's really hard when, that's a routine part of your day.
It is. She, kind of like the Winchesters, same day, different apocalypse.
Absolutely. Only with more estrogen.
This is true. And she doesn't die and come back.
No. Okay, Michele, your story is a bit different than in discussions we had before this panel. You said that it was something that you wrote entirely new for this anthology, though you'd been thinking and playing with some of the concepts for a while. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So actually I had about 5,000 or 6,000 words, and I literally started it had to be 25 years ago when I was a graduate student. And I tend to start stories with the character name. So this character, Welcome, came to me, and the story is called Cemetery Sisters. And at the time I had actually recently lost my mother. And so for some reason I found comfort going to different cemeteries, and I would just go and I would read headstones and just think about the people who live there. This is when I lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And a story came out of that, and Welcome it's set in a post-apocalyptic setting, a community, which I had never really written anything in that kind of space before. And Welcome is a troubled girl. Her mother is known to be mentally ill, or believed to be mentally ill, and she worries about being mentally ill herself when she hears in a cemetery 2 voices. And so the story unfolds of her going back to the cemetery, and she eventually meets up with 2 deceased spirits who are sisters, Grace and Millicent. And then they have some encounters, and things begin to go awry, and Welcome has to figure out what's going on. So it was really fun to write a very different type of story and to finish it. So I'm deeply grateful to Jason and to being in this company, because I always loved Welcome, and I love mother-daughter types of stories and girl coming of age stories. And so felt like I really had to believe in the story and was able to kind of push it to the next level.
Are you planning to write more in that world?
Well, after you and I chatted a couple of weeks ago, I was like, I spend so much time doing the world building. There's been a virus, there's a war, and their communities it's called the Great Separation. So some communities are sort of walled off. So there's a lot to, there's magic, there's witches. So there's a lot to explore. So yes, I am thinking I need to come back to that world.
Okay. And next, Paige, you too I didn't realize this when I read the story as preparation for writing the foreword. It seemed like a part of a continuing urban fantasy set in Tucson. So where did that world and the the Jersey Devil, not gargoyles, though somebody imitates a gargoyle at one point, where did that world of the Jersey Devils and Tucson and gem shows, how did that all come together? You're muted. Can't
Better?
hear you.
Can you hear
Yeah,
me
that's
now?
better. Yeah,
The
I can hear
cat.
you now.
Can't get you.
The cat sat on the mic. Sorry. She does that. So yeah, Truth in Advertising. This was the second story I wrote for this anthology. The first one that I wrote, I actually ended up, sorry, Jason, pulling, and because it was a better fit for a different anthology that it's coming out in July 1st. But anyway,
Go ahead and plug it.
yeah, it's the oh my God, Galactic Stew anthology from Zombies Need Brains. It's a story called Blue, and it's about a cafe run by witches. But
And it's a great story, and I hated to lose it, but
well, you ended up with something that was completely outside my bailiwick.
I love that one too.
I am a country girl to the core. I was born in one of the towns that is on the registry of ghost towns in the United States. I grew up in a paper mill town in Maine, and I live in the woods of North Carolina. The only city I have ever lived in right out of college was Tucson. So when I had to write an urban fantasy, guess where it got set? So yeah, that was pretty funny. I have a secret life as an art gallery owner, so I've attended many gem shows, and I wanted something that was completely different than what I normally do. So I did a mashup where I put the Jersey Devil in Tucson with his witch guardian, who has been his guardian for many generations. Her family has guarded this Jersey Devil. And it turns out that all the origin stories for the Jersey Devil are wrong, and they all trace back to her family, and there's hints of that. And so in order to figure out what was going on in this story, I did a ton of world building. Like, I had to figure out how this woman came to be watching out for this Jersey Devil, and why they were in, what was going to happen in Tucson, and what they'd been doing for all these years. And so I tend to do a lot of world building even for short stuff. So my stuff tends to feel like it's in a world that could go a lot of directions. I don't know whether I'll write more in this. I've got a novel to finish for Jason right now. That he's champing at the bit for. So yeah, I've got to do that first, and then we'll see if we revisit San and Josh, the Jersey Devil. So yeah.
Yeah, your normal métier is epic fantasy, is it not?
Yes, it's epic fantasy with kind of an Old West vibe and lots of feminist overtones. So this was very outside the box for me, but hopefully my voice will still come through, and you will still realize it's me if you pick up something else from me.
Cool. And Rebecca, okay, yours is another one that, I was reading all three of these stories and going, oh, these are part of continuing series. I'd like to know more about them. But, Rowena's Curse, I believe that's the title. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay,
Rowena's
yeah.
Curse.
Rowena's Curse. It's been a few weeks since I read all the stories. I apologize. But that likewise, the setting with the witches, with the cursing, and the surprise ending as to who is really the protagonist of this story, all felt like they were part of a larger whole. And I understand you just recently published a novel featuring witches. Any intersection between them? And could you tell us about the story that's in Witches, Warriors, and Wise Women?
Yeah, no, I had published through Perspective Press, Amber Witch, and I just love delving into witches. And once it went off to Jason, and he was doing the processing of editing and all the minutia that goes on before a book comes out, I started another novel, and I found I missed my witches, so I had to go back. And, for the short story, I had to do something with witches because I was dealing now with ghosts, and I wanted to do something else. But Rowena's Curse is really a love letter to Asheville, because I took the urban part seriously, and I relocated to Asheville just, 6-7 years ago. And the city reminds me of upstate New York, where I'm from. And the architecture really plays a part. I actually had to cut a lot out of the story. I wanted the characters to really interact with their environment. I wanted it to be like a character in its own and have its influence and flavor. And I was really learning and exploring the area. So I thought, these two would meld so beautifully, because Asheville is like a bunch of little villages together. So I wanted my prime witch, Rowena, I always go to the dark side. So she has to do some sort of redemption for her past sins. And don't want to give a lot away, but she has to spend half her day in crow form as penance as she pays back her blood debt, essentially. And when I said earlier that I really believe that reality needs a touch of magic, I love mythology that clarifies what life is. You know, that little tinge that helped kids get through the day. Why does the sun rise? Why, you know, is the moon blue? Why is this? And I got thinking about the crows because I had gone to the Tower of London and seen those little ravens and then, you know, the crows back home. And crows keep a memory. They remember human faces. They are vindictive if you're not nice to them. They are kind and bring gifts if you're kind. So I wove all those things together to create something that I felt was realistic in a way, because I like to believe that there's magic out there. You know, if we could think it, we could dream it, it's there. So I like to think that, you know, maybe that explains why crows hang out together. And maybe this is why, you know, they're so dark and little pesky little buggers, because they're secretly cursed witches all over the country.
Yeah.
And now we know that we're actually being watched by curses that are witches that are paying time for crimes of magic.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I had to, you know, add a little personality. Her best friend and, well, dark dysfunctional friendship with Magnus is also a nod to somebody I know who was the most lovable, miserable so-and-so you'd ever meet. But just playing with things. I really took, you know, the prompt that Jason had for this anthology and said, well, what could I do with this?
Mm-hmm.
I had to play with time because for some reason, everything I write has a time. Time is important. So I gave Magnus, you know, slang from the 1930s because I decided he was cursed from then. So it was a lot of research, but a lot of fun to play with my witches again. And then it helped me go back into the novel that I'm polishing now.
Ah, okay. Is there any, I take it there's no intersection between the novels and the, when you got this assignment from Jason or the invitation from Jason, you mentioned redemption. Were there any other particular themes that you wanted to address in this story? You know, you mentioned the crows, you mentioned the city, but you know, a lot of us in this panel write roughly, you know, feminist sci-fi and fantasy. What aspect of that did you want to address in your story?
I like stories that have relationships. And honestly, Rowena wouldn't work at all if there wasn't Magnus. You know, there has to be a counterbalance. Even with the crows, there has to be a counterbalance with the owls. And you know, there's this beautiful downtown. There has to be the counterbalance with, we have what's Bowcatcher Castle here in Asheville that has a really dark history to it that no one will explain, but it's guarded by barbed wire and attack dogs, literally. Those questions make me ask why, and when I don't know the answer, I make it up. But I really did want it to be about relationships and finding out, you know, what does matter, and Rowena, you know, needs to learn that. You know, she'd been so cold and taking advantage of her gifts when she really needed to, you know, give a little perspective.
Yeah. I kept thinking when I read the story about the parable of the starfish. You know, that story about they come upon a guy on the shore, somebody comes upon a guy on the shore throwing stranded starfish back in the sea. And he is challenged to the effect of, why are you doing that? You can't save them all, but I can save that one. And that seemed to be something that was resonating through that story.
I
Um,
think the hardest people to save are the ones who don't think they need saving.
there is that. And that is a big part of redemption. It certainly is. Okay. Michele, what themes were you trying to get at when you started Cemetery Sisters? Or was it just Welcome was there, Welcome was talking to you, and gravestones? Or, you know,
Yeah,
what?
I think as I really tried to look at like what's going to move the story forward and what's going to deliver an emotional payoff, and really dig into the characters. It was really, paring away. So there's like layers of relationships, and they're all pretty much female relationships. There's a teacher that's very important to Welcome. There are the deceased sisters and their relationship, but really it's also Welcome and the mother. And the mother is an unlikable character in the beginning, and then as their story unfolds, you kind of find out more. And I also think the sense of when we meet Welcome wants to leave. So there's one train that comes, I think, once a month through the town to take people back into the new cities that have developed. And she desperately wants to leave, right? And then one of the deceased spirits has a sense of leaving. And so I kind of play with, what does it mean to stay? What does it mean to leave? And it's also about vengeance and revenge without giving too much away. And so having the characters work through that. But I would say what's kind of holding it together is this mother-daughter and a young woman coming into her own power.
So a coming of age story plus relationships, is that a valid? Cool. Gail, okay, what were you trying to explore with Heaps of Trouble?
Well, I love Charleston as a setting for the Deadly Curiosity series because it is, for North America, it is an older city. It has such a complex history. And its history, as I often refer to it in the books, is a glittering city built on rivers of blood, because its history is tragic and brutal, with its role in the slave trade and its role in the Civil War. So yes, if you go to Charleston, there's marvelous food and beautiful buildings, and isn't the historic section beautiful? Oh, there's Dooler's Alley, where all of the spoiled rich young boys used to shoot each other dead over a bar argument. So it is a city that is like a beautiful serial killer. It's gorgeous to look at, but there's this darkness that is part of its soul. And so I love mining that with the Deadly Curiosity series. And with Cassidy and the store, of course, her boss has been in Charleston since the beginning, and Europe before that. So he's seen all of this transpire. And there are so many secrets because it is the South. And there's this kind of Gothic element to it where there's an awful lot of ugly stuff people don't want coming out. Only what's dead and buried never stays that way. And in Heap of Trouble, again, without giving too much away, there's somebody who gets sucked into trying to do the right thing in the wrong way, and then ends up compromised by it, and nearly leads to the end of the world, which is pretty much just another Tuesday for Cassidy.
Sort of the journal of unintended consequences for the person who tries to do the right thing the wrong way.
Yeah.
And how that plays into a city's history.
And in that sense, really how you make a little concession and it doesn't seem like much, but then you make another little concession and another one. And the next thing you know, you're a long way from where you started and somewhere you never expected to be. And that's really part of what came up. And trying to make amends for that.
Mhm. The road to hell paved with good intentions and all that?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Paige, what themes were you trying, what spoke to you about the concept of concrete dreams and witches, warriors, and wise women? And what themes were you trying to bring out? And also tell us about the jewels, please. Tell us about the jewels, please, please.
Well, all of my stuff, all of it, you're going to encounter women who have very strong sense of self and intention. And I use a lot about the power of story. It's as a tool and what our history is and everything that I do. So, witches, warriors, and wise women are in everything I do. So Jason knew what he was going to get when he asked me to do this. He knew he was going to get strong women doing cool stuff. I mean, that's what I do. So, yeah, so it was pretty easy. It wasn't a stretch. So the thing about this story that was interesting to me was the sense of mistaken history, the sense of the stories that, who tells the stories in our world? What is our history? It's those who have the voice. It's those who are in power. And so many of the stories we know and that we learn in history class or from the obvious places are wrong. They're not told from the point of view of the people who actually lived them. They're told by the people who won. So, the Jersey Devil stories, if you look at those, are very much a monster is born from a woman who is cursed, and murders people. Well, in this case, the true story of, you get a hint of what the true story of the Jersey Devil is, and the family who is believed to have caused the curse actually ends up protecting the Jersey Devil for centuries, and the Jersey Devil is exiled from his home because of this, and they have to take care of him as the world becomes more and more modern. And the basic idea of the shiny jewels is that one of the so many places in the world have things that are precious to them, and it's not necessarily obvious. When you think of New Jersey and the Pine Barrens and things like that, you don't think of special gems or semi-precious stones, or but there are some very rare gemstones that come out of that part of the world that very few people know about. And so I wanted to take that element, like what would make that place special? What would be the history of the creature that is native to that land? And how can I use that in a modern setting to be a calling for that creature to go back home? So all of that came into play, because I firmly believe that the history and the stories and the real stories need to be told. And if I can put a twist on that and get people thinking about it, then I'm doing my job.
Cool. Jody, your story read like a love letter to Chicago and to Northwestern University. Was that what you were trying for? Or were you looking to emphasize other themes that I'm missing here?
Of course, I love Chicago. I was born there. I lived there up until December all my life. And really, it's a city where things get done. But also, it's a generous place. It is. Iosha has been given many gifts, and I think that one of the themes of it is not only gifts, but no good deed goes unpunished, in a way. There's a bunch of Tibetan monks. They are creating a mandala on the floor of one of the buildings at Northwestern that is going to be a gift to the city of Chicago. And the Sandmen are all very interested in this because it's like professional curiosity.
Yes.
But beyond that, she also makes a gift of some of her sands to someone who is having trouble sleeping, and that turns into a complete debacle because her gift is being used not for good but for evil. She wants to undo that because there is so much more to it than that. She has been given to. She wants to give. People people give to each other in this. There's quite a lot of generosity in it. And also the gift of good dreams, of sleep, is incredibly important to people who have nothing, because they have to get up and face a horrible day the next day. So to make their sleep less troublesome is something wonderful that the Sandmen do. Some of them are absolutely the most obnoxious people that you will ever know. Many of them are kind-hearted. The guild president is kind of a prissy individual, and I like playing with him.
Yeah.
But they all truly believe in their task. So they never get anything back from their clients. Their clients don't know they exist.
Mhm.
So it's just freely giving from what you have. And I think that's tremendously important, is the phrase, cast ye bread upon the waters. So you may never see that, but maybe some bread will float down the river to you from somewhere else.
Yes, definitely. And the idea of the generosity, and I kept thinking also as I was reading it, sleep that knit the raveled sleeve of care, as Shakespeare
Yes.
says, and how important that is when you have nothing else, really, and
It's
how
very true.
evil it is to misuse that. So,
Yes, very much so. And I wanted to show how a wonderful thing can be turned. Magic is neither good nor evil. It's entirely a matter of symbolism and intent.
mhm, yes, and how it can be perverted that way.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, we don't unfortunately have all of the writers in Witches, Warriors, and Wise Women here. Could you give us a little taste of some of the other stories that are in the book?
Sure. I can actually read
The blurbs.
Table of contents.
well, I wrote blurbs for all the stories. Put them on the back of the book.
That's good.
Nice.
So, yeah. So we've got Seeing the Pattern by Jody, Lynn, Keep It Trouble by Gail Z. Martin, and then a story called Stalking Horse by Janet Walden West, which is it's also, she's got an existing universe that she's working with in this story.
Mhm.
So Samantha and Rachel seem an unlikely pair, a monster hunter and a Selkie forming a sometimes uneasy alliance, but their newest quarry may be the most dangerous thing their budding partnership could ever face.
Mhm.
Then Cemetery Sisters by Michele, Destroying Angel by Nicole Gibbons Kurtz. She's also writing in an existing universe with this story. When Manola and Valak flee to Earth, they find their new living arrangements a trifle chilly, but Manola is determined to regain what she's lost, and she's willing to do anything to achieve her goal. Anything.
That one didn't seem so much like an urban setting. It seemed like an outpost in Alaska or someplace very, very cold.
Yeah, it's actually it would be more of a sci-fi story in her existing universe.
Okay.
So
No, I just wanted
we
to
had
make
do
sure
some-
I understood. Yeah.
What's that?
I just wanted to make sure that I understood and I hadn't read it wrong.
No, you read it fine. Yeah, we had to do some tweaking on that one to make it fit the urban fantasy. So yeah, but we got it. I think we did well. Or she
Hey,
did.
sci-fi, having a touch of sci-fi in the anthology, which with so much fantasy is always good for balance. You have that in a certain amount of sci-fi in Michelle's story, but you know, to have this adds to the idea that cities are and communities are very wide-ranging.
Right. And that was something that we've talked about. And, you know, it's something that I feel like, I don't want to make too big of a digression here, but I feel like urban fantasy has been pigeonholed into it absolutely has to happen in a city. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think any community would work. So I sort of use the term urban fantasy and modern fantasy interchangeably in that respect, just so I don't, you know, ruffle too many feathers by saying it's urban fantasy and then somebody says, but this isn't in a city. Like, yeah, don't worry about it. It's modern fantasy. So, okay, I'm going to keep reading the descriptions here. So the next story then is Poisoned by Sugar, written by J.D. Blackrose. A charmed doorbell, a sneezing clock, and a friendly witch proprietor. What else could a magical coffee shop need? Perhaps poisoned sugar and murder. And then God Willing and the Creek Don't Rise by our token male author from the anthology, or token man, is Darren Kennedy. The witch, Rhiannon, isn't particularly welcomed by the down-and-out village of Dry Creek, but the news she brings of their next visitor is even less well received by the folks of this frontier town. And then Devil to Help by Paige, Rowena's Curse by Rebecca, and the last story in the anthology is called Unbroken, and it's written by Alexandra Christian, who writes a lot of romance, heated romance, I should say. This is definitely not a romance story, and it is really quite straight up the most horror bent story in the anthology. When her sister is broken in the most tragic manner possible, Betsy is witness to the strength of mountain family and the terror of mountain magic and revenge. So, and that wraps the anthology.
Cool. So what can readers and viewers look forward to in the next Concrete Dreams?
Okay, so yes, I decided that with the success of this first installment, that we were going to actually turn this into a series. I will remain as the editor on this. So the next book is going to be basically on the theme of gods and monsters. That won't be the title, but that's the theme. So yeah, should be fun.
Cool. Very, very cool. Okay. We're coming up on the closing, and so I'm going to ask our esteemed authors and publisher to give us a minute or two of, what they'd like our viewers to leave with, the thoughts they'd like our viewers to leave with, or the books they'd like to promote beyond Concrete Dreams. So, Michele?
Well, first I want to say for the emerging writers listening, like, persistence is really important, and never give up on your stories when you believe in them. So I wanted to say that, and I mean, I'm just super excited to be in the anthology. So I will say that I run a blog for writers and readers called The Practice of Creativity. You can find me on Twitter, Michele T. Berger, and that's Michele with one L, and Berger, not like the burger that you eat, but Berger. And I do have a novella that's out about a mysterious virus that is transmitted through an everyday hair care product. If you're not sick of reading about epidemics and pandemics, it's set in the 90s, called Renew You.
Very cool. Rebecca, last words for the evening, not final.
No, definitely not last words. It was definitely a challenge writing a short, because I tend to be long-winded as well. It makes you sharpen what you do. But if you like my witch story, Rowena's Curse, please pick up Amber Witch and take a look at that one, because that's the emerging, developing witch.
Very cool.
There's a bathtub on the cover.
Yeah,
my.
check on the cover. What do you want, Jason's fault. He was right.
Cool. Paige?
Oh my goodness. Well, if you like that story, know that if you like A Devil to Help, know that my other stuff is a little more intense. Jason's got it up. There's Dragon Weather. That is the first book in the Legacies of Arnon series. Look, he's going to show me the whole thing. And Wing Wind is the second one, and the third one, Long Light Haiti. That the paperback came out today, by the way.
Yes, happy book birthday on that.
Happy book birthday to me.
Oh, and Amber Witch from Rebecca, yes.
Yep, there it is.
Thank you. I didn't have a copy right here with me. I was not planning.
And that is Rebecca is one of my writing partners, and full reveal, I did the photography for that. That's our friend April in the bathtub. Yeah, it's pretty funny. So you can find me everywhere at Paige L. Christie, and the pretentious L is in the middle because I get called Christie Paige my whole life otherwise. So there's an L. And if you're hearing moaning in the background, my coonhound is having a dream. Sorry.
All of these are better with added pets. What can we say?
Right.
Jason, final words from you.
For me? Oh, well, I'm just going to show this as the anthology that I was trying to show you earlier, but my Zoom background was messing it up. This
Tales
is
from the
Tales
Black
from the
Ambulance.
Black Ambulance. So Gail has a story in this, Deadly Curiosity story, and there's 15 other really good stories in here. And like I said, they're all about creepy stuff. And then this is one of mine. You can see that. This is my horror novel.
Yeah.
First book in the series, in theory. But yeah, the next projects from Perspective Press are we're currently recruiting gothic horror paranormal stories for Off the Beaten Path 4, and we will be opening up recruitment or submissions for gods and monster stories of modern fantasy soon for Concrete Dreams 2.
Okay.
Beyond that, Jody had a great idea earlier about doing a pandemic anthology, so maybe we'll see how that works out. No? Okay.
Garlic and crucifixes from two of your writers, though.
We'll see.
Some of us have had enough.
Yes.
This would be like a year or 2 years from now, so it'll be like reflecting on the memories of.
Yeah, Paige is having none of it. I'm telling you, she's just not having any of it.
Okay. There's also sometime in the works, possibly for Concrete Dreams 3. We were possibly looking at doing a Broken Heroes anthology. So,
and when do the invitations go out?
Got some stories with that.
And when do the invitations go out?
Soon. Okay.
Very
we have
good.
a couple of stories already for that anthology. So yeah, that will be probably Concrete Dreams 3. So.
Okay. Cool. Gail, any words that are final to the panel but not final to the world?
Well, if you like Charleston, I really do my best to make the city a character in the Deadly Curiosities books, and to make the stories something that draws so much on local history and legend and lore and urban legend that they couldn't happen the same way anywhere else. So if you like Charleston and you like crab cakes and you shopped at the old city market, come on over and check out the Deadly Curiosities series, which will have another book coming out later this summer. And you can enjoy all the other short stories and novellas and triples and folly 1 and 2. So that's really what we've got going. We bring out a lot of books through Falstaff and through through Darkwind and Soul. So there's always something new. And then you'd ask where to find me online, and I'm pretty easy as long as you remember the Z. The Z is important. GailZMartin.com, and on Twitter and on Facebook. But if you don't get the Z, you get another author who is a perfectly lovely person, but she writes about Jesus and I write about vampires. And that just gets messy if people get in the wrong place. So you'll really want to remember the Z.
Okay. GailZMartin.com. Okay, Jody, any last words for the panel?
Gail, totally different use of crosses between you and the other. Anyhow, let's see. If you like my story about Ayosha, you can find the other 2 Magic Touch books. The Magic Touch is currently being published by Wordfire Press, and Wishing on a Star, which contains the next story, is from Arc Manor Press. It's very complicated, such as publishing. But my current, most recent series that isn't the Myth Adventures is the Moon books about the Bright Sparks, who are young scientists who are doing projects on the moon under the aegis of a popular television scientist who looks absolutely nothing like my co-writer, Dr. Travis Taylor. Nothing at all.
Nothing
But
at all.
the protagonist is a 16-year-old girl, and the young scientists are from several different races, and they're both male and female. A couple of them are gay, and they are really interesting characters in their own right. What they are is not their demographic. What they are is brilliant and determined to survive and determined to do their own thing. So they're really interesting books. The first one is called Moonbeam, about building a radio telescope out of a crater on the moon. The science is all accurate because that's Travis's long suit. And the second one is Moon Tracks, which is about a race around the moon that the Bright Sparks participate in. And will they make it all the way around? Will they even finish the race? So tune in and take a look at that. Also, for those of you who would like strong female characters, my Taylor's Arc series, which Wordfire Press also has, about my lady doctor in space. And I consider her and her husband just about the only happily married couple in space. So they're kind of fun. It's not actually humor. It is good medical science fiction. So, and I'm always writing something else.
Yes. And your website?
My website is, it's easier if you type in jodynye.net. I have a few different URLs for it. Otherwise, it's jodylynnye.com, and people frequently forget the third N. I'm on Facebook as Jody Lynn Nye, so tune in and catch me there. I rarely tweet, but sometimes I am on Twitter at Jody Lynn Nye, also the same way. 3 Ys, 3 Ns. So stop by my page and have a chat. I frequently post stories about my cats, and people enjoy those. They're the adventures of cats who were accidentally abducted from where they originally were and brought to an entirely different planet. At least that's what my cats tell me.
That's what they think. It certainly is. And they expect to be worshipped wherever they are. And on that, yes. And on that note, we come to the end of this episode of, yes, Paige, your cats. We come to the end of this episode of Hot Off the Presses. I hope you'll join us and join Continual next week at the same bat time, same bat station. Thank you all for being here tonight. And thank you, our panelists. Good night.
Thank you, Jean Marie.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.